and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill, 3 parts, 16 sections. Let me reiterate what my colleague has said. I think it's completely unacceptable that there was no pre-legislative scrutiny, notwithstanding that the largest opposition party agreed with that. I think it was absolutely essential to have pre-legislative scrutiny. There was also no regulatory impact analysis published. Whether it was done or not, I don't know, and neither were the general heads of the scheme published. And so I see the urgency to this in relation to the one aspect of the registration, and I'd have no problem with that. But this bill is doing a lot more than that. Some of it good, some of it I haven't had the time to examine my own concerns in relation to it, as someone who spent 17 years at local level and watched a housing crisis actually manufactured day after day from 2009, when a public house was never built in Galway from 2009. I can't say it often enough. And then over the years, we've seen what's happened. We've seen the approved housing bodies, and let me state, they do great work. Am I happy with the number that are there, or the regulation? I am not. And the reason I'm not happy with that is because we see the fragmented nature of our public housing provision, split on every level, rather than the government through the local authorities having the main authority, the money, the resources and the power to provide public housing. I see that as the best way to tackle the housing crisis, one of the aspects. And over the years, they did a very good job. However, they were starved of fund, starved of leadership, and forced by a government policy to rely on the market from 2014 onwards, where we brought in the housing assistance payment, and the exact words used in Galway City, the only game in town, forget everything else, the housing assistance payment. Between that and 2 more schemes, I understand we're approaching £1 billion per year straight into the market, and we wonder why prices are going high. And then on top of that, we've the whole other jigsaw of schemes, from the Help to Buy scheme, which has been deplored on every level by various organisations, but the government sees fit in its wisdom to keep it going and so on. Every single scheme has been designed to keep the prices of houses artificially high, to the point where the Help to Buy scheme were given help to consultants who do a great job and deserve a good salary. But it really is an indictment of our housing policy when we need to help consultants buy a house. And that's what we're doing with the Help to Buy scheme. And so, because the area of the approved housing bodies was unregulated, we set up the regulatory authority by legislation in 2019. And I was on the Public Accounts Committee at that time. And I was really aghast at the amount of housing bodies, approved or otherwise, that had fitted into the gap to provide essential services. Housing just being one of them, others care. And imagine they have to fit into that gap, described as charities or approved housing bodies, unregulated until this came along, and they're functioning now for 2 years. And I've taken the trouble of looking at their sectoral analysis, and the figures are absolutely frightening as to what we've done with housing. 58,184 dwellings are now owned by approved housing bodies. And when this regulator asked for them to register, they got a 96% response, which they thought was very good, a 96% response to answer questions. And they point out that the vast majority of the housing bodies, a small percentage, 9 of them, presumably including the McFerry Trust, is responsible or has 68% of the housing stock. So at the bottom of this, then, they point out to the huge risk involved in having such a concentration in such a small number. Nowhere is that reflected in the minister's speech or analysed, and I really don't expect ministers to know everything. That's why we have pre-legislative scrutiny. That's why we have committees. And so those members who agreed with waiving the pre-legislative scrutiny left us in a dilemma, because we have nothing. We have nothing to examine. I haven't had the benefit of briefings, and I know officials are very good at giving briefings, but we haven't had any briefings, any analysis, any way that we can think as to what's happening with the further fragmentation of our housing policy. So we're here now to bring in emergency legislation in part, which I've no problem with, but I don't again, and I re-echo what Deputy Richard Barrett said, and I'm fairly average intelligence. I can read, I can tease things out. I'm having a little difficulty understanding some of it, let me tell you, and I shouldn't have that difficulty because I always say my job is to explain it to my constituents and reassure them that something is being done about housing. That job is becoming increasingly more difficult. So we have a concentration, and we have a response by 96%. And then if we look at the McFerry Trust, one not mentioned today at all, and obviously at some stage they did great work and still do great work, but serious questions in relation to governance. And we thank the Controller and Auditor General and his office for producing that chapter. I don't know if you've read it, Minister. Going back a few months ago, I read it quickly. I read it slowly, or slower on this occasion. And it really is something, an absolute expose of the failure by the department, by the trust itself, to monitor what was going on and have robust, these words are used, robust, strong mechanisms, governance, didn't exist, did not exist. So we have a chapter here, and just to put it in perspective, because this is one of the approved housing bodies that the government utterly relied on in relation to the provision of homeless services. So 2,000 clients, 71 locations, one of them in Galway, which is closed, which I have no idea what's happening in relation to it, and approximately 600 housing first tenancies. The Trust was the largest non-governmental NGO provider of homeless emergency accommodation in the state, something that should be done directly by the local authorities. And so what do we get out of this? You should read this. You should read the amount of money it has cost us alone, just in relation to this aspect of this approved housing body in relation to homelessness. So over 5 years, 140 million, from less than 5 years, 2019 to 2022, over 140 million. And so we have the Dublin Homeless Regional Executive, the Department and the Trust. And in November 22, the government approved exceptional funding, just November last year, to this trust of 15 million. That's on top of previous millions that were given without prior approval by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. But I'm not really here to give out about that. What I'm really here to look at is what it takes to regulate any body in Ireland, and that we never ever seemed to learn, and yet we're going down the road more and more of the fragmentation of the provision of what should be a basic human right provided by local authorities, with a hands-on leadership from the government in relation to rolling out those, but that's not what's happening. So this is just one example where we have completely commodified homelessness and put it out to this organisation. So 15 million were given with no clear criteria conditions as to how that money was to be used or how they could claw it back if it wasn't used properly. This is the Controller and Auditor General's report. He's not given to exaggeration. I've never known a man to be more moderate in his staff and when they write their reports. This examination was undertaken to review the Department's oversight arrangements in respect of funding provided to the Trust, the factors giving rise to the need for exceptional funding, and the Department's monitoring of those conditions, all found faulty. And then it gives us the background. I'll skip all of that because I really want to get to what has happened here. During 2022, the Department conducted spot checks on 18 homeless service providers, and one of them was the McFerry Trust. And they sought invoices in November during 22, and they were told, well, there are no invoices available for the first quarter. Come back again, quarter 2, 3, 4, and we'll have invoices then. And they didn't go back. There were no more spot checks. So we go forward then, no more spot checks by the department. And then we go back. There is no documented procedure on spot checks, because it's one of the recommendations later on. So imagine we need the Controller and Auditor General to tell us all of this now. So then there were various advances, no record of approval of those advances, and the protocol is there that there should be approval by the department. Now, In September 22, concerns had been raised with the department that the Dublin Regional Forum, by the Dublin Regional Forum. So they picked it up, and this is what I'm going to come back to, because the regulatory authority doesn't seem to have picked this up. And again, I'm not laying blame on a regulatory authority, but one would think naively that if we have a regulatory authority, that they would pick up something. And if they're not picking it up, why are they not? What do we need to change? What resources do we need to put in? But this was picked up by the Dublin Regional Executive bit by bit. Following the retirement, so we get a CEO who retires, and we get another CEO who comes in for a little while, and would seem so concerned that he departs after not too long in the job. And you know what happens? The department recommends a former county manager to come forward and act as an interim CEO of the trust. And do you know, Minister, what he gets per day for that interim job? €1,000. This €1,000, following the resignation of the CEO on the 11th of October 23, after less than 5 months in the role, he obviously saw sense, or she did. The Trust requested advice from the Department regarding a temporary replacement. The Department suggested a former Chief Executive of a County Council as a potential candidate to provide short-term assistance to the Trust. The Trust engaged the recommended candidate, commencing on the 16th of October at a daily rate of €1,000. And they recouped this, of course, from the Dublin City Council, who then recouped it from the department, and so on. So I'm highlighting all of that because you can see the money. And now I'm going to go into the reports. 2 reviews. The Trust notified the charities regulator and the approved housing bodies regulator in July 23, just over a year ago. A requirement, so and so on. Both regulators have since launched investigations. So now there's 2 investigations underway. And then we have 2 reviews underway. On top of those 2 investigations, we have 2 reviews underway, one by the County and City Management Association. They're looking at it. And we have another one by, I've lost where it is, and we have a strategic review by the department itself. And then we have an audit process commenced in 24. Now, all of this has costed millions, and it has costed minutes, and we're in our fifth current review and report that we're waiting on, all to do with one trust. And then we find out, as of September 24, the department has not made any material changes to the protocol agreement, and there was the inadequacy of the protocol agreement and inadequacy of the monitoring arrangements that led to all of this in the first place. The Peter McVerry Trust is one of the main providers, so these are the conclusions, and they're recommending the controls have not operated properly. The Controller and Auditor General telling us the spot checks didn't operate, and the quarterly reports didn't operate, and he's recommended a more formal structure. So I'm going to leave that just aside for the moment, but bear in mind the millions that it has cost. There's an ongoing review, there's an overall monitoring committee set up now that's monitoring it, and what else have we got? What else have we got to monitor? It's really worth reading, okay. All with one trust, and we have, of the approved housing bodies, what was the figure? 441 came back. More than 441 exist. And we wonder at accountability and the absence of it. And all of this I talk about in the context of Galway City, which has absolutely no hope to give applicants on the housing waiting list. I am not given to exaggeration. There is absolutely no hope. I have the minutes of what was set up, the task force. And the task force is there since 2019, ostensibly set up because we had a crisis. And do you know what's happened since? We've changed the name of it. That's very good. We've got a new chair. We've slimmed down the membership of it. And we now have a housing task force for delivery, which is a very nice change, but we've had no change. There are no affordable houses. The targets are all below. And I'm going again, I'm not going to use my words. These are direct quotes from the minutes. Council struggling for accommodation provision through the HAP and the RAS, the only game in town. All projects, huge problem with lack of infrastructure in the city and the county. Very difficult to give balanced development. Social housing delivery, the Galway 2024 target, projected pipeline, the projected pipeline, 136, delivered to date, page 4 of the minutes, 1. Okay. So one would ask, what is happening here? A task force should have set for a few months, a quick analysis, come back again a few years later, quick analysis and see what's going on. We have Simon Community telling us that there are no properties available under the HAP or RAS scheme under any of the discretionary. And I'm going to finish. I think there's a way out of this. I would hope there'd be a change of government, and I'm not given to saying that from here. I'm more given to looking at issues. But unless there's a change of government with an absolute change of policy that recognises the provision of a home as a basic human right, the prices of all our property and our homes has to come down. We have to face that. We have to phase out the HAP. We have to phase out it completely. Obviously, we can't do it overnight, but we cannot keep feeding the market so that prices stay up. And so we're here today looking at a piece of legislation that got no scrutiny, absolutely no scrutiny whatsoever, ostensibly to facilitate the falling off a cliff on the registration day. So I have no problem supporting that, but then other parts put in without proper scrutiny. It is no way to do business. It is just, and that's only one tiny piece of legislation. God help us tomorrow night with the Planning Act. That's going nowhere.